The biggest stars of the 1950s, the ones you grew up watching as television was established.
You're worth 10 grand to me. Oh!
The icons that helped make our childhood full of laughs, and the people who wrote the songs that we danced to at our high school prom.
You can buy a dream or two.
The musicians and actors who put the fabulous into the Fab 50s, but away from the camera and the microphone. Sometimes their own lives weren't as glamorous as Hollywood made it sound.
Hey, Ricky, watch this!
And many of our favorite stars had their own worlds crash down around them. These were the most beloved 50s icons who struggled for years to right the ship, but sometimes just fell a bit short. And if you enjoyed this week's episode, please make sure to give it a thumbs up for us and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a beat. But without further ado, let the show begin. Where was Curly Howard born? Before he was our Curly, he was born Jerome Lester Horwitz, the youngest son out of 5. And because of his baby sibling status, he was given his first nickname. Yup, even before Curly, he was called Babe.
That'll do, pig. That'll do.
And while Moe and Shemp wreaked havoc as kids, Curly was actually very well-mannered. He never gave his folks any trouble. That's something we can all relate to, right? But those two were there when it counted. Like the time a 12-year-old Curly accidentally shot himself in the ankle while cleaning a rifle. It was Moe's quick work that got Curly to the hospital in time to save his life. However, there would be some lasting damage. Most noticeably, his leg was thinner and he had a limp. Surgery could have fixed it, but Curly was terrified of that idea. And a limp? I mean, that would be impossible to conceal as a staged performer, right? Nope, not at all. It was not an issue. Moe, Shemp, and Larry Fine first made up the Stooges. But once Shemp got tired of Fine's drinking and raging, he left, leaving a wide open space for Curly Howard. When he was on stage, Curly walked with a really exaggerated stride to completely hide his natural limp. Very, very clever.
Oh, is that a scene or is that a scene?
Yeah.
Why did Curly shave his head? When Moe first approached Curly to join up, Curly had a very distinctive full head of hair and a mustache. Problem was, not everyone thought he actually looked funny. From here, the details sort of vary. The most popular version says that it was Curly who asked the team to wait a bit. Before he went, shaved his head, and came back. He told them, quote, "You can call me Curly." Some other accounts say that Moe shaved his head. But whatever the true story, in the end, this was enough of a change of look to make him funny. Of course, coming up with an idea doesn't mean you have to love it, and Curly was a bit of a ladies' man. Some even called him a womanizer. So when he had to maintain that shaved look, he worried it would make him look unattractive to the opposite sex. In the same vein, Curly really appreciated a pretty face and wanted to date every pretty woman he encountered.
Did you ever hear of Snow, Beautiful Snow?
Why, yes. Did you write that?
No, I shoveled it.
So, womanizer, alright, sure. It's crazy to think about someone so full of wacky energy worrying about something like that. But accounts from those who knew Curly say he was pretty shy under all the jokes, and besides courtship worries, he liked to keep to himself. I never would have imagined. Was Curly Howard married? In his prime, Curly Howard was considered by many to be the greatest stooge of all. Even the prickly Larry Fine ranked Curly at the top, owing to his natural gift for comedy, added to the fact that he did all that and wasn't even formally trained. It's believed Lou Costello was more than heavily influenced by Curly too, and Curly's routines would play in Abbott and Costello feature films. All this comedic talent didn't translate to romantic success though.
Girls?
May I see some stockings?
Curly was married 4 times, and none of them lasted very long. He was with his first wife for 3 months. After a very long courtship of 2 weeks, It's said that wife number 1 only got with him for his money. Ouch. His second wife made it to 3 years, give or take. Third wife back to just 1 year, and the final was the longest at almost 5 years. Reportedly, Curly was frustrated with life and took to drinking, which might have had a negative effect on his relationships. His marriages didn't last, but from them he did get 2 children, a daughter from wife number 2 and 4. And he's also the uncle of actress Joan Howard, daughter of Mo, who sadly passed away in 2021. At least his final wife, Valerie Newman, was called, quote, the only decent thing that happened to Curly, and the only one that really cared about him. Did Curly really save dogs? All hail Curly, the king of slapstick.
Now hold it.
Curly really leaned into his image and affinity for physical comedy, delivering laughs to everyone who watched. But he also helped others in an even bigger way. You see, Curly Howard was a huge animal lover. For one thing, he had dogs of his own. In fact, his contract with Columbia Pictures allowed him to bring his canine companions to set.
Did anyone ever tell you you had pretty paws? But you shouldn't bite your nails.
They reached a middle ground though, and limited that to 2 dogs at a time, since sometimes his pets would just let themselves in. But you might say there's no such thing as too many dogs, and Curly would agree, since he loved their easy affection, easygoing needs, and enduring loyalty, to the point he had multiple of his own, including a collie named Lady, along with a boxer, cocker spaniels, and miniature schnauzers. All of this in spite of the fact that his big bro Shemp was terrified of dogs. Okay, but how many dogs can one person have? Well, quite a bit. Curly was always looking out for strays who needed to be brought in from the cold. Eventually, while on tour, it got to the point that Curly would rehome a dog in need in every single city he performed in. And get this, it's estimated that Curly alone helped save a whopping 5,000 pooches. Why did Shemp replace Curly? By 1944, Curly was starting to show signs of being unwell. His energy plummeted. Because the team could not stop performing, Curly took what time he needed to rest and jumped right back into things. But then on May 6, 1946, Curly was supposed to come on stage, but he missed his cue. And when Mo went looking for him, he found Curly with his head slumped against his chest, mouth open and twisted. Curly Howard had had a stroke. His scene partners reworked the show while Curly was rushed to the hospital. Mo looked after his brother in the hospital, and Shemp, right nearby, was recruited to fill in for Curly. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he could get back on his feet and back on stage. But 1947's Half-Wits Holiday would be Curly's final proper appearance with the Three Stooges. When Curly tried to participate in other skits, they were deemed inefficient to release. And sadly, there would be no improving those scenes or coming back. A second stroke sealed the deal for Curly, and he was forced into premature retirement. Shem, who had been replaced by Curly years prior, was now permanently replacing him. What illness did Curly Howard have? Poor health plagued Curly for years. He was very fit growing up, and actually a very good ballroom dancer. But even if he hadn't literally shot himself in the foot, he would have had problems. His 1944 stroke was just one of many, and when he checked himself into that hospital, he got some much-needed help, but also some sobering diagnosis, including extreme hypertension, retinal hemorrhage, and obesity. When Curly tried to come back to work in 1945, he was a shadow of the vibrant man everyone knew. He weighed significantly less, he had a rougher voice, and aging lines on his face. And that second stroke left Curly partially paralyzed, shutting down the lively, off-the-wall physical comedy great. The final few years of Curly's life, he was unable to communicate with a visitor, and it reduced him to crying. Mo was the one best able to communicate with Curly, which eventually just amounted to Curly squeezing his hand, or just blinking. As if watching a loved one going through this wasn't enough, Moe was then told Curly was becoming an inconvenience to the hospital and he had to be moved. At first, Moe refused, but moved he was to a sanitarium. Moe was contacted to move Curly one final time, but that plan fell through, as 11 days later, on January 18th, 1952, Jerome Curly Howard died. He was just 48 years old, a vibrant flame doused to a flicker and finally smothered completely. Curly Howard, a man of contradictions. He was the face of show business without any formal training. I mean, just think about that. The last thing he mourned when he could communicate was, quote, "I guess I'll never be able to make the children laugh again." But, you know, he was quite wrong. We remember his remarkable life and his influence still today. The Three Stooges, Curly Howard, you live on forever. So who was your favorite of the Stooges? What was your favorite lineup? And who should we discuss next? Richard Red Skelton was born on July 18, 1913 in Indiana, the youngest of 4 children, and the only lucky one with the fiery red hair. Nicknamed for that trait, young Red never got to meet his father, who died 2 months before he was born. This made life especially challenging for the family. Without their circus performer father, times were tough. With the war and looming Great Depression, Red helped out his mother by finding part-time work as a newsboy, and she didn't oppose his lying about his age. Extra, extra! Read all about it. Entertainer Ed Wynn spots 10-year-old Red selling newspapers in front of the Pantheon Theater, and after buying every newspaper he had, Wynn took the boy backstage and introduced him to every member of the show with which he was traveling, and the acting bug had fully bitten the young boy. As a teenager, Red hit the road full-time as an entertainer. Red's mother said of his youthful departure from the nest, quote, "His destiny just caught up with him at an early age." Red sent money back home to help his family, and while traveling with the medicine show, Red Skelton discovered that he had a knack for making people laugh.
Star there, Half Moon, Big Dipper.
Heck, it was in his blood. Dad was a circus clown for the Hagenbeck Wallace Circus, and Red himself even performed with the same circus in 1929. Now we need to talk about his career on a showboat. Don't get too excited, it's not the Love Boat. Skelton was aboard the Cotton Blossom, which went up and down the Ohio and Missouri rivers. He loved the job, but foresaw the industry coming to an end, and lucky for us, he took his talents elsewhere. Red had a reputation for hosting dance marathons in the 1930s. And while working one of those in Kansas City, Red met his first wife, Edna Stillwell. Now Edna had a knack for telling it like it is with Red, confidently telling him that his jokes were not funny, and that she could do better. Old Red believed her, and she became his manager and chief writer. Red Skelton just a month shy of his 18th birthday, and Edna only 16 when the two were married. And she was a force to be reckoned with, negotiating bonuses and salary raises on her husband's behalf. And although the couple divorced 13 years later, they remained friendly, and Edna continued writing for Red even after their marriage ended.
All right, let's do everything we did on our wedding day, huh?
Uh-huh.
Only this time, could I go into the other room and cry?
Red really did it all, from the circus to vaudeville and burlesque. But his big break was when his radio career began around 1937, with an appearance on the Rudy Valley Show. Simultaneously, he began appearing in films, like Having a Wonderful Time in 1938, where he played Itchy, the camp counselor. He appeared in more than 30 MGM films during the 1940s and 50s.
Hiya. Oh, hello, Mr. Skelton.
Oh, you remember me, huh?
But radio is where Red grew to the entertainer he is. Skelton was gaining immense popularity, even with the man in charge. Red performed at President Roosevelt's birthday party in 1940. His act was clean and entertaining, which was what Roosevelt liked about him. Red Skelton was the king of clean comedy. Now he was confident enough to begin his own show in 1941, called the Raleigh Cigarette Program. And this is where Skelton began creating his incredible characters. A highlight being Junior, the mean little kid, full of mischief. And if anyone remembers listening to this, please let us know in the comments below. What some people don't know is Red's other talents. He was a skilled artist. He began painting pictures to help him visualize his routines. And he began displaying his works in 1964, soon even selling some of his pieces. So if you out there have a Red original, please let us know about it. But just as Red's riverboat of life was cruising down the river smoothly, they hit some rough water. First off, the divorce with Edna occurred, but like I said, it was beyond amicable. The couple even left the divorce proceedings arm in arm. And Edna still managed Red's career, including negotiating a 7-year Hollywood contract for him in 1951.
You know, it just doesn't figure. With all your years in show business, you still can't judge character.
The same year, the Red Skelton Hour premiered on NBC, but we'll get to that after a little character building. Because Red was no longer married, he got drafted into the military in 1944. His managers tried to get him a deferment, but they were unsuccessful, and he was inducted as a private on June 7, 1944, assigned to the Special Services, and he performed many shows for the troops. But during this time, he began suffering from exhaustion and was eventually hospitalized. Skelton was released from his duties in September of 1945 and returned home to his new wife, whom he had met on furlough. He and Georgina Davis were married in March 1945, and the couple had 2 children, Valentina in 1947 and Richard in 48. Skelton was back at it and about to embark on the most successful venture of his career. He proposed taking the radio characters that so many people knew and loved and adapting them to the small screen. NBC helped create the widely popular Red Skelton Hour in 1951.
Oh, they're going about 90 miles an hour, and this one guy takes a cigarette, opens the door and throws out, slams the door, and the guy driving says, "Who got in?"
Red was immediately honored with an Emmy Award in 1952 for Best Comedy Show and Best Comedian. He and his writers took home another Emmy in '61 for Outstanding Writing Achievement in Comedy. But what many don't know is that Red began to feel pressure. He felt like he had to perform, or he would let people down, and he began experiencing physical pain from his rigorous schedule. Red began drinking to alleviate the pain and to also forget the woes of his marital problems. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, the Red Skelton Hour was canceled in 1953 by NBC due to declining ratings and the show's sponsor pulling out. Lucky for all of us though, CBS quickly took over and it enjoyed success all the way until 1970. By the end of the 50s, Skelton was the only comedian with his own weekly variety TV show. Things were looking up until he received the worst news of his entire life in 1957. Red's beloved son, his only son, was given a year to live at best after being diagnosed with leukemia. Red was, of course, devastated, but made it his sole mission to give his son the best year of his life. He took Richard, Valentina, and his wife to all the grand places he could think of in the world. Richard even got to meet Pope Pius XII, which was a highlight of the incredible but somber trip. Richard Skelton passed away on May 10, 1958, just 10 days shy of his 10th birthday. Skelton returned to work, but those close to him say he was never the same man again. But in 1969, Skelton gave one of the most iconic performances of his career.
He says, "I've been listening to you boys and girls recite the Pledge of Allegiance all semester."
His monologue about the Pledge of Allegiance is one of the most highly requested speeches, so successful that Columbia Records released it as a single. And once again, Skelton was performing for the president, doing his Pledge of Allegiance for President Nixon at the White House. But right after this success, CBS chose to cancel his show in 1970 to make room for new shows appealing to younger audiences. Skelton was shocked. He even took a dig at CBS 15 years later in his award speech when he said after a standing ovation,
I want to thank you for sitting back down. I thought you were pulling a CBS and walking out on me again.
Speaking of walking out, Red and Georgina divorced in 1971, but Red found happiness again when he married Lothian Toland in 1973, whom he remained with for the rest of his life. Then on the 18th anniversary of his beloved son Richard's death in 1976, his former wife Georgina committed suicide. She was just 54 years old, and Red mourned his former wife's death for many months. Again, Red Skelton returned to his work. He continued performing live until 1993, until he was 80 years old. In total, his entertainment career spanned 7 decades. Truly a remarkable man, the great Red Skelton passed away on September 17, 1997 at the age of 84. We owe so many laughs to that man, so many comedians since inspired by him. Do you remember a specific character that Red Skelton portrayed? What about Sheriff Deadeye or Cauliflower McPug? And what do you remember most about Red Skelton? Did Desi Arnaz come from a wealthy family? Desi Arnaz was born all the way in Cuba, where his father held political office as his home city's youngest mayor, and the descendant of some old Cuban royalty. But in 1933, the Cuban Revolution broke out and totally uprooted Desi's entire family. A violent mob destroyed their entire property and livestock. They lost everything, and Desi barely escaped the fray. His mom went into hiding, and his dad wasn't so lucky. He ended up being jailed. Desi's uncle worked very hard to get him out, and finally the family fled with what little they had to Miami, Florida. Desi, just 17 years old here, pretty much penniless, and he didn't even speak a lick of English. He and his dad stayed in a garage, and their roommates were rats and roaches. Of course, everyone remembers their first job. Well, his was working at a local Woolworths. But all the while, he was mopping floors at Woolworths. Desi Arnaz had hope, and through this whole turbulent phase of his life, the young man became a budding patriot because he knew no matter where he fell in America, he could climb back up. So he let his dreams stay big, turning his sights to showbiz. He slowly built a name for himself, and he introduced the conga line from Cuba to the US clubs. Was Lucy really engaged when she met Desi?
No matter what you've done, I forgive you.
Love, in all its truly messy forms, defined the truly complicated relationship between Desi and Lucy. They were in love when they met, just not with each other. The year was 1940, and both rising stars crossed paths on the set of Too Many Girls. Boy, isn't that a coincidence. The two were unlike anything America or each other had ever seen. Lucille tended to date older, taller men. The two started chatting and couldn't stop. They set up a dinner date, crossed paths at the beach, and stuck together like magnets. But they both were in very serious relationships with other people at the time. Desi was with the girl he nicknamed Freckles, and Lucille was outright engaged. But the story goes, Lucille broke off the engagement the next day. After that, the couple was inseparable. Actress Ruta Lee saw Lucille oscillate between an independent woman way ahead of her time and a traditional housewife whenever it came to Desi. Stuck together like glue, whether America liked it or not, and some really did not. For one, the couple lied about their ages. Lucille was 6 years older than Desi, and executives would have made a big thing about that. So instead, they made a big thing about Lucille being American born and raised and Desi Cuban. In fact, the higher-ups at CBS warned Lucille the American public would never go for a show revolving around a couple like this. But in classic Lucille fashion, she stood her ground, and boy was she right, setting herself and Desi up as the first interracial couple on American TVs. The Supreme Court hadn't even legalized interracial couples yet. It was this first ever mixed couple that showed the world just how successful this television show thing could be.
You gorgeous, exciting woman, you.
Why did Lucy and Desi get divorced? Desi and Lucille were in the spotlight like no other couple was before. And behind the scenes of their sweet, idyllic marriage, before, during, and after Desi's time with Lucille, there was a lot of cheating. In fact, right after they began going out, they worked on their own projects before Lucille heard Desi met up with his ex-lover, actress Betty Grable. Lucy showed up at his house and told him off, and then Desi proposed. But that was just a band-aid on a persisting flesh wound. Desi's first girlfriend, nicknamed Freckles, never protested even when she knew he was cheating on her with Lucille. That made him feel terrible, but he did it anyway, and that would be a bit of a theme. In his memoir, he said, quote, "Even though I might have done some bad things in my life, none of them could have been as bad as what I did to her." Lucille and Desi had conflicting schedules, one wrapping up just as the other one was heading out. This and Desi's wandering eye made romance and intimacy hard to coordinate. And when they tried for a baby, Lucille suffered several miscarriages before they conceived their first child, baby Lucy. And for a while, things did change for the better. Desi and Lucille biographer Bart Andrews asserted, quote, "Some of Desi's womanizing was alleviated from the moment little Lucy was born." Director William Asher seconds this, saying Desi looked especially tender in those episodes that immediately followed their daughter's birth. But for some people, success also means more to lose and farther to fall. And Desi began to feel pressures of, well, everything. From family to work, being a sitcom icon and husband to the legendary Lucille Ball, to managing their company, Desilu Productions. Up went the drinking and cheating. It was an open secret that Desi's father and grandfather had mistresses, even separate properties to see them at. Those who knew Lucille and Desi knew they could both be a piece of work, which is why the legendary Lucille Ball is also on our real-life Hollywood Jerks video if you want to watch that one next. One time, Ball saw a magazine that promised the juicy details on who Desi was sleeping with. It went into detail about him and a relative recruiting ladies who were referred to as, quote, "cuddle for cash babes," and how the women left, quote, "considerably richer." Lucille disappeared into her dressing room, came out, and told Desi right to his face, quote, "I could tell them worse than that." Some of his alleged affairs included dancer Lillian Molieri and actress Patricia Medina, who inherited Lucy and Desi's money. Before they split, Desi and Lucille became the parents of two, Lucy and Desi Jr. According to daughter Lucy, Lucille balanced and separated her work life and home life, keeping all the zany antics to the stage, and using her mind for organization and discipline at home to run an organized household. Lucy called her mom a list maker, and as for Desi, she says he had a love of life and a sense of humor she called twisted. But Lucy inherited her appreciation for music from him and his business sense, operating by some simple rules. If you don't know, ask. There are no stupid questions. Also, hire the right people who can do their job. And finally, if you don't know what to do, don't do anything, which actually helped his daughter a lot. Lucy got a front row seat to learning that love is complicated. As for her brother, we have an entire deep dive on his complicated life, so be sure to watch that one next. Lucy and Desi Jr. inherited some life lessons, wisdom from their parents, and some difficult, first-hand wake-up calls, and something a bit more tangible. Lucille set it up so Lucy was a trustee in her estate, then split it 3 ways between her second husband and her 2 kids. Did Desi Arnaz ever get sober? Desi's substance abuse exacerbated problems that were already there, like his quick temper, his poor choices, and attitude. It's something that would plague his life and that of his son, but it would also be his son who would help him. Desi's daughter tells how Desi, quote, resisted going into any program for a long time. The family didn't want to air their dirty laundry to others. The idea made Desi sick. But so did the alcohol, and so did the death of his second wife, Edith. When Junior saw his dad so downtrodden, he told him, quote, "Come on, Dad, you can do this." And that was enough to get Desi on the road to recovery. And Junior was right there with him when Desi said, quote, "My name is Desi and I'm an alcoholic." But sadly, this huge step happened not too long before Desi would leave this world. What did Desi Arnaz say to Lucy before he died? Not long after getting sober, Desi found out he had lung cancer. But Desi and Lucille's lives were forever connected by that point. Even after splitting, they were forever friends. Lucille's close friend, actress Carol Channing, once said, quote, "They spoke so lovingly of each other, you almost forgot they weren't together anymore. That's because what Lucille called their unconditional love for each other, that could not die. As she puts it, quote, there was forgiveness, there was understanding. There was an appreciation for that other person and what you got from that other person, regardless of the stuff that hurt that never went away." So, Desi still had his family in his life when he passed away at 69 years old, December 2nd, 1986. Passing away in his daughter's arms, while Lucy held the phone and he talked to Lucille, who said the same 3 words to him over and over. "I love you." And Desi said back, "I love you too, honey. Good luck with your show." What was Ricky Nelson's TV show? Of course, this early teen idol got an early start in the industry. He was pretty much born right into it. If you grew up in the 50s and 60s, you definitely watched episodes of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, joining the household of husband and wife Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, along with their good, respectable boys, David and Ricky. Adventures quickly became a cultural touchstone who stayed in the American psyche for decades. But did you know it maintained another record in the turn of the century? The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet kept the record of longest-running live-action sitcom in U.S. television until 2021. That's when it was passed by a bunch of hilarious dirtbags from Philadelphia. No, I'm not talking about the Eagles. I'm talking about the outrageous FX comedy It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which surpassed this wholesome program. Ricky's show was helped to fame from his parents' own star power. Harriet served as vocalist in a band led by her musician husband, Ozzie. A famous family didn't make Ricky immune to all the typical problems a kid might face. He had really bad asthma at night. He needed to run a vaporizer for relief. But out and about, Ricky was plagued by chronic shyness, to the point where adults called him an awkward oddball.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, come on, calm down, will you, fellas?
In the early days of Ozzie and Harriet, the kids were played by professionals, until Ricky and Big Bro David were old enough to join. His first episode was called Invitation to Dinner, and it helped break the ice and ease his insecurities. Did Ricky Nelson write his own songs? As Ricky came into his own, boy did he have it all. The looks, singing, acting, even athletics.
Ricky, what are you doing here? I just want to make sure you serve the sum.
He and his brother performed a whole trapeze act on TV. By the time he was 18, he brought in more than enough income to be quite comfortable, though his parents very carefully managed his money and put it in trust funds. There was still plenty that Ricky wanted, like to impress his girlfriend. His gal loved Elvis Presley, so he did what any hot-blooded youngster would do. He said he would be producing a record of his own. It's worth noting that at that time, Ricky didn't have a contract with anyone. But he was good on his vow, spurred on by the King's success with a label that wanted an aspirational youngster who could be a popular face.
I'm walking, yes indeed, I'm talking for you and me.
And so we got I'm Walkin', A Teenager's Romance, and You're My One and Only Love. Next time you listen to any of his musical stylings, keep an ear open. Does it sound familiar? If so, that's because Ricky names the man in the blue suede shoes himself, Carl Perkins, as a huge influence, especially his rad guitar riffs. That was Ricky's main inspiration, and a fair bit of his work is cover songs. But he does have quite a few original creations of his own, including ones written by Ricky himself, like You Just Can't Quit, So Long, Mama, and A Flower Opens Gently By. Ricky's particular spin on music helped create a memorable and very beloved flavor of rockabilly, as well as some ballads that were never heard before. Did the Nelson family get along? America's had seen and would see many families on their TV. But the Nelsons had the unique advantage of being a strong presence when the cameras weren't rolling. There was no forgetting they were around, thanks to their music careers. The House fans saw on TV a replica of their own home in Hollywood. The real one, I mean. Emmy-winning writer and director Peter Jones made a documentary all about the lightning in a bottle that show was Ozzie and Harriet, the adventures of America's favorite family. In his studies of the show, Jones felt that instead of cameras capturing their drama being a detriment, the quartet felt safer getting to work out their family drama thanks to the guise of filming a scene. They basically had a safety net, one that was pretty vital to their relationships. Things weren't always picture perfect in their personal lives. Beginning with patriarch Ozzie, who came off as a genial if sometimes hapless sweetheart, but in reality could be a bit of a tyrant and control freak. Eventually, Ozzie prioritized keeping the show on air over being a good dad to his sons. Although his older son David would insist, quote, "My father went to great pains to see that Rick and I had as normal an upbringing as possible." Years after the fact, Ricky's own daughter Tracy would know firsthand the tension that boiled just under the surface. Tracy, also an actress, once said, quote, "There's a huge discrepancy between what was real and what people think was real about the Nelson family and the people involved." She got a front row seat with Ricky's own contradictory personality. He became the handsome face of good, squeaky clean values, frozen in time. Of course, like any TV actor, he resented being typecast and wanted to be something more, but here Ricky deviates. Because he ended up shaped by this teen heartthrob label who just didn't know how to grow up. Ricky even flat out said he couldn't see himself getting older, and while he was probably referring to his maturity, he ended up being right in a far more chilling way. Who is Ricky Nelson's wife? Like plenty of young men his age, growing up, Ricky wanted to date. His mother, Harriet, wanted him to focus on his career, even before he was an adult. She set very high standards, which basically meant she disapproved of every girl he brought home. When he was 17, he became smitten with his on-screen girlfriend, Marianne Gaba. Both were considered too young for anything serious, although Gaba says a lot of necking happened. A year later, Ricky fell in love with Lorraine Collins, who was 15 at the time, already an established country singer. The two collaborated and Ricky created his first composition, My Gal. My gal, gal. She introduced him to Johnny Cash and Tex Ritter. Then along came Kristen Harmon, daughter of football player Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox, as well as the older sister to actors Kelly and Mark Harmon. The Nelson and Harmon families had been friends for quite a while, so the latest generation cementing that sounded just fine to both parties. In theory, everything should have worked out. They were both shy, had controlling fathers, and came from Hollywood royalty. They got married on April 20th, 1963, but that basically just started the countdown to disaster. Even though they had 4 kids together, actress Tracy, twins Gunnar and Matthew, and finally Sam. This quartet got an up-close and personal look at the definition of dysfunctional. Without being in the room with them, we can't know for sure what happened every second that tore this marriage apart, but the kids did have some opinions. Major outlets agree that drugs and personal demons played a huge part, and on top of that, it sounds like history was repeating itself, with Ricky focusing more on his career than being a dad. At least that's what Kristen thought. She made it no secret she hated his chaotic touring schedule. In fact, she demanded he give up music and focus more on acting so he could be at home more. But apparently the family was also accustomed to a pretty expensive lifestyle, and Kristen in particular spent quite a bit of dough. So the two needed income from wherever they could manage. They fell into what their son Matthew called, quote, a horrible Hollywood divorce. It was rough and not quick, to the point that they were so divided the kids were left in the care of household staff. Kristen filed back in 1977, and they weren't fully split up until 1982. So who was to blame? Well, drug tests years later would reveal one point. Ricky liked to mix cocaine, marijuana, and a very strong painkiller. The kids would call their own mother a narcissist who enjoyed her fair share of vodka. On top of all that, the entire experience left such a sour taste in Kristen's mouth that she would try and stamp out her own kids' dreams for good. How old was Ricky Nelson when he died? December 31st, 1985, Ricky Nelson was traveling from Gunnersville, Alabama, bound for Dallas, Texas, to perform at a New Year's Eve concert. He was one of over half a dozen people on board an old DC-3, a refurbished plane from World War II era, bought by Nelson from Jerry Lee Lewis. While en route to the venue, suddenly the cabin grew smoky. Passengers were unable to breathe as they inhaled toxic fumes. The pilots directed the plane into an emergency landing, only to collide right into a network of electrical wires. The pilot and co-pilot emerged from the debris, severely burned but alive. All 7 passengers, including 45-year-old Ricky Nelson, died in the crash. Subsequent toxicology reports would find traces of cocaine in the bodies of several passengers, including Ricky Nelson, although his sons would call this a lie. On top of that, the plane had a history of technical issues. That night, the deadly fire was caused by a defective heater at the tail of the plane. The heater caught fire and all hell broke loose. A taste of the emotional turmoil that the media would cause Ricky's surviving family. We always want to believe in the fairy tale story we see on TV, that the people who give us such beloved stories enjoy a happily ever after of their own. But there's something to knowing just how grounded their lives are, knowing the odds they also fought, the problems they made for themselves and had thrown at them, and they still marched on. That's exactly what the true life of Ricky Nelson represents, even after pulling back the curtain.
Lucille lost it all at 16. It was the 4th of July, 1927, and Ball's grandfather came home with a mysterious package wrapped in brown paper. Inside sat a gun. The kids were excited to try out using the weapon, and Ball's grandfather watched over them shoot at tin cans in the backyard until the weapon unexpectedly went off, and next thing anyone knew, their young neighbor who was over at the time was bleeding in the bushes. The boy was alive, but he was left paralyzed from the bullet severing his spinal cord. Lucille's grandfather was ready and willing to pay the medical bills, but the boy's family had bigger demands and pursued a lawsuit. Ball's family lost absolutely everything. Young Lucille watched everything that made her house a home disappear. Not just furniture, but her grandfather's very spirit and drive. He never worked again. Of that one incident, she would later say, "It destroyed our life together there in one life-changing shot." She fought for TV's first interracial couple. Lucille Ball did not just face turbulence though, she sometimes caused it, and at the most important of times. Things were different when she was growing up and building her career. Segregation was in full force, and anyone who broke the status quo risked causing a scandal and getting blacklisted. That's why the idea of a British Irish lady being with a Cuban man was positively unthinkable, especially on TV. But Lucille Ball, who built herself a lot of power behind the scenes, had her mind made up. When her radio show did particularly well, CBS wanted Ball to develop it for TV, so Ball agreed, but she set a condition. Lucille wanted to work alongside her real-life husband, Desi Arnaz, a Cuban-American actor, musician, and producer. Now, CBS executives weren't so keen on the idea. They felt American audience wouldn't be comfortable with seeing a mixed couple on their screens. Thankfully and reluctantly though, they agreed. The show got the green light and got a pilot episode. At first, CBS didn't love the pilot, but the couple didn't lose steam there, and when they launched a traveling vaudeville act, they proved CBS's fears completely wrong when audiences fell in love with them. Lucille and the Salem Witchcraft Trials. Now, some of you might associate witchcraft with Bewitched star Elizabeth Montgomery, or Sabrina Spellman even, but actually, Lucille Ball is worth a mention too. There's certainly something magical about her, and that was certainly the case for Ball's ancestors, who had the misfortune of being connected with one of the most incredible moments in early American history. NPR revealed as much, writing, "A lot of celebrated Americans were descended from the accused witches, including Walt Disney, Clara Barton, and Lucille Ball. She's certainly an impressive company with ancestors tied to that scary time." The Salem witch trials of colonial Massachusetts upended countless lives. People rushed to the outrageous conclusions driven by fear, and that fear proved deadly for many innocent people. To hear that Ball's ancestors faced this baseless persecution is terrifying to think about. Lucille Ball's Red Scare testimony. America faced a Red Scare twice. The first was after World War I, the second after World War II. Most people are more familiar with the second Red Scare because of McCarthyism. Because artists and entertainers could build big followings, they also became big targets in the second Red Scare. And Lucille Ball, a registered communist, was seemingly caught red-handed. As the summer of 1953 drew to a close, Ball was brought forth to meet privately with investigators, to which she confirmed she did indeed register under the Communist Party, but denied being an active member or even voting for a candidate. The testimony of America's favorite ambitious and zany housewife was released in September and totaled 27 pages in length. She explained registering as a communist because, quote, Grandpa wanted us all to. She said she simply had to, quote, appease an old man. And even her husband, Desi Arnaz, would remember seeing the old man reading editorials from the Daily Worker. The incident certainly didn't impact J. Edgar Hoover's opinion on I Love Lucy, which he declared his favorites of the entertainment world. Can't believe I'm saying this, but I agree with Hoover. Dealing with Arnaz, the womanizer and alcoholic. Arnaz often did stand up for Lucy, but pinpointing the status of their marriage can be a little tricky. Ball herself called it a nightmare that in no way matched the chipper fun shown on I Love Lucy. But the two would later talk respectfully of one another, even after separating. But when things were bad, it often came from Arnaz's unfortunate lifestyle choices. He was a notorious womanizer, who, when not eyeing a new conquest, eyed another bottle of alcohol. On TV, viewers saw a fun couple that set the bar high for all married America. They had no idea that both husband and wife had their pitfalls. And Lucille Ball wanted to keep it that way. She endured Arnaz's alcoholism in private. Remarkably, part of this was because of love. One thing everyone consistently recalls about the two is that they did share love between each other. It's an odd, contradictory feeling that really is pretty relatable for any couple that's struggling. It seems baffling that two people could struggle and be so mismatched, yet still claim to love one another. But that's exactly what they had, and what many others have too. Multiple miscarriages. She made history when she finally did get pregnant. Arnaz did apparently ease some of his bad behavior under certain circumstances, but this relief would also mark some periods of utter heartbreak for Lucille Ball. Lucille had 2 or 3 miscarriages before she finally gave birth to Lucy. Ball wanted them to be parents. Perhaps fatherhood would draw Arnaz back down to earth, change his perspective on the world. But, like so many times already, Ball would have to face a lot of loss along the way. When Lucille Ball did have children though, she made history. At the time it was out, I Love Lucy wasn't allowed to say the word pregnant. And that was a bit of a problem since both the character of Lucy and Lucille herself were actually pregnant, and noticeably so. They got around this one by instead saying she was expectant, or spectin, if you were Arnaz's character. And so, Lucille Ball became the first pregnant woman to play a pregnant woman on TV. The whole thing caused a great scandal. And, in traditional Lucille Ball fashion, totally reshaped the landscape of TV into what we know it as today. I mean, all in a day's work. Multiple divorces, and 2 children. The kids who helped Ball make history were Lucy Desiree Arnaz and Desiderio Alberto Arnaz IV. Both kids grew into adults whose passions reflected those of their parents. Little Lucy certainly got exposed to the acting scene early on, having taken walk-on roles for The Lucy Show. For a while, her work was tied to her family, but by the mid-1970s, little Lucy was completing her own passion projects. Meanwhile, Desi Jr. embraced his musical roots to the fullest extent. He was famous from the start as the baby who helped make television history. Desi Jr. kept himself most busy with music, but when he did act, it was pretty powerful. The kids built successful lives and careers. Lucille Ball still had a rocky time in her personal life. She herself sported a hot temper, and though fatherhood tempered some of Arnaz's unfortunate habits for a bit, they just couldn't stay together anymore. In fact, they almost split a few times, both parties raring to go, but the final swing of the axe came in 1960. But that wasn't the total end of Ball's romantic life. She found love with stand-up comedian Gary Morton. The two met in New York months before she was to open on Broadway with the musical Wildcats. 13 years younger than Ball, Morton faced rumors and accusations of being a gold digger, though he claimed to have never actually seen I Love Lucy since he usually worked when it ran on. Still, he signed a prenup, and the couple went about their lives. Ageless. While balancing all this hectic activity in her personal life, Lucille Ball continually broke boundaries in her career. We've seen her test the limits of what was acceptable to show on television. She held her head high in the face of nationwide paranoia. Lucille opened new doors of possibilities for couples of all backgrounds. She even became the first female to run a major television studio, Desi Productions. You might know some of that studio's work. Titles include little-known projects like Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Wow. One of her biggest achievements, though, is something we can still turn to for inspiration. Not everyone gets their big break immediately in life, and it's easy to become discouraged by that. We like to think stuff has to happen big and fast, or it'll never happen at all. But Lucille Ball proved this is absolutely not the case. The iconic and groundbreaking hit I Love Lucy didn't take off until Ball was 40. Sure, we can see figures like Betty White taking on new titles like there's no tomorrow, but I Love Lucy was the start of big things for Ball, and for the country. And to think that it kicked off when she was 40, in a world where aging is taboo in Hollywood. It's pretty inspirational still to this day. Do you remember all the crazy schemes Lucy used to come up with alongside Ethel and Fred? What surprised you most about her life? It's only fitting that such a monumental figure as her had an eventful life, but it's still shocking to think back on all that she's done and faced. At the end of the day, it's a big reminder that even those we only ever see smiling have plenty of challenges of their own.
Series conception. Not only did Our Gang span multiple mediums, starting as silent films before adding sound,
Maybe we ain't us. Maybe we ain't us.
and displayed children of all races as equals when segregation was still the norm. But this was also a pre-war story, before the history-altering Second World War, when innocence was a precious rarity and children hid under their desks for the smallest chance of surviving the ultimate fear. Our Gang, or The Little Rascals, was the brainchild of producer Hal Roach, who started off in Hollywood as an extra, still figuring out what he wanted for his life. Now, Hal had a knack for humor and an eye for what made people laugh, and he used all of Los Angeles as his backdrop. The story goes Hal was searching for his next big idea when he observed some kids playing at a lumber yard. At this time, child actors were becoming stars just like adults. But Hal was oversaturated with kids wanting to audition. None of them were real, but the improvised playing that he witnessed was. And now Hal had his next idea. First, he dubbed it Hal Roach's Rascals before settling on Our Gang. And the emphasis on realism was continued by senior director Robert McGowan, who wrote some scripts but didn't make the kids read them. Most couldn't even read at that point. So he would tell them the general happenings of a scene and set them loose. Ad-libbing totally encouraged, which was super easy when the films were silent. But he kept it up when sound came into play. He wanted to show kids being kids. Over the next few decades, the Little Rascals would elevate the newest of newcomers into immortal stardom. But it may have roped them into an unsettling trend of pain, hardship, and terribly early deaths. The rumor and the response. One of the biggest sparks that ignited the legends of the curse is the fact that much of the biggest stars in the franchise died before 65. And oftentimes much earlier. In 2002, The Hollywood Story aired The Curse of the Little Rascals and put that final nail in the coffin. Now, Snopes.com, dedicated to proving or debunking myths, stated that if you look at every star's age of death, there's no morbid pattern, but the number isn't easy to overlook. But it's not just about age of death. Some of these actors had truly horrible stuff thrown their way. So we're gonna lay out the facts and let you decide. Are the Little Rascals cursed? The price of fitting a part. The Little Rascals went through a myriad of changes, from silent to sound, and constant cast turnovers as the kids aged out. An early change was replacing Joe Cobb with a heavyset kid. Enter Norman Chaney, aka Chubby.
Call me Chubsy Ubsy.
Sorry, I mean Chubsy Ubsy, as he prefers it in the short Love Business. But Norman's weight was not normal. At 3'11", he weighed 113 pounds, which is considered obese by the BMI index. But Norman ate a normal diet and exercised, but he just got heavier and heavier as he got older. Doctors realized he had a glandular disease, and he was finally treated. But even that was more of a burden than a cure. Norman then lost over half his body weight very fast. His heart swelled from stress, and terribly, Norman died. Being one of the first of our gang's regulars to do so, the boy was just 21 years old. And the heartache and headache didn't stop there. When Norman was buried, he didn't get a headstone. His mother couldn't afford one, and she didn't get one either when she died. Thankfully, nearly 8 decades later, a Good Samaritan raised enough money to get both of them their due headstones. Call to Arms. Even though The Rascals was a pre-war story, the actors learned what war cost. Bobby Hutchins was excited and full of life, and earned his name as he ran around the studio until wheezing. He was the life of our gang during his time, the quintessential little brother running around after the big kids. But when World War II tore up half the world, Bobby rushed off to the U.S. Air Force's Aviation Cadet Program. And to the theme of this video, sadly, Hutchins was killed in a mid-air collision in 1945. Sad if he was killed far from home, but Hutchins didn't get a chance to fight for his country, being killed in a training exercise. Bobby was just 20 when he died, 1 week shy from graduating flying school. A terrible end for the most lively and excited of the gang. That same World War took another little rascal. Donald Haynes didn't have a nickname on the show, but war destroys all things good and peaceful, and the poor first lieutenant and former rascal was shot down in 1943 when he was just 23 years old. The Tempest. Recruiting twins for any production gives directors more freedom. It doubles working time if only one acts at a time. And if they're both on screen, you can have fun, cute plots, say things in unison. There's tons of comedic options. And twins, Winston and Weston Doty, were iconic in their short time with our gang. And when they left, they joined a cheerleading squad and were enjoying life. This time it was the wrath of Mother Nature that came into play. Winston and Weston were 19 years old and enjoying a New Year's Eve party. They called their mom and wished her a happy new year. Terribly, those would be the last words she ever heard from them. As driving back home, the twins hit a massive rainstorm and flooded roads. Their car got swept up in the waters, and the boys, along with one date, perished in that flood, whose total body count was 40 people. Under the Knife.
I'll never say never again, 'cause you ain't in love again.
Who could forget about the adorable Darla Hood, the first crush for Alfalfa, Waldo, and pretty much every boy? She stayed in our gang for years, but didn't let it inflate her ego. In fact, Darla would call out child stars for thinking they're above others, and praised her mom for not being fussy about fame. Darla made a name for herself after, too. Thanks to radio work starring alongside Jack Benny and Groucho Marx, she lent her voice to commercial jingles, and was a regular on the Merv Griffin Show. Darla secured a steady life for herself by the time she reached her 40s, but sadly she never reached her 50s. In June 1979, she needed an appendectomy. Pretty standard, right? Almost 300,000 are performed each year in the US alone. But tragically, the blood used for her transfusion was contaminated with hepatitis, sending this well-off, well-rounded star to an early grave. She was 47 years old. Wow, it's kinda hard to imagine that people seemingly on top of the entire world also struggled with some of the same issues we all do. But I do think it's a good reminder that even the so-called lucky ones struggle with the same pains that you and I do. So, who that we mentioned today was your favorite celebrity in their heyday? Whose life was the most tragic? And did we forget a massively famous star from the 1950s that also suffered tragedy? Well, please get in the comment section and tell us who and why. We would love to make a round 2. If you enjoyed our compilation today, please hit that thumbs up icon to help the video circulate. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a memory. But most of all, from all of us here at Do You Remember, we want to thank you so much for watching.